Mm.
When we talk to some of the largest companies in the world and they ask us, can we fine tune a model? We tell them no. And this is why we're happy for you to run us head to head, RAG plus our model versus a fine tune model. And that we
Mhm.
don't think that you will get that much lift, if at all, from the fine tune model. But the
Interesting.
cost of fine tuning a model is insanely high, and people are not registering that when they go down this path.
Hey, welcome to this episode of Build versus Buy, a 30-minute conversation with product and engineering leaders about situations during their career where they've had to decide whether to build or buy. If you'd like to be a guest, reach out to me at manggit@useanvil.com. That's MANGGIT@useanvil.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating/review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Enjoy this episode. Back to another episode of the Build vs. Buy podcast. My name is Manggit Ing. I am your host, co-founder and CEO at Anvil. Anvil is the fastest way to build software for paperwork. And today on this podcast, I have Matan-Paul Shetrit. He is a VP of product at Writer.ai, and it's really nice to have you on the call today.
Great to be here, Mangad. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. So maybe to start, we always like to set the stage a little bit. So would love an introduction on your background, what you do, what's your focus area at Writer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent the last since 2012 or 2011 working in tech as a product manager at a bunch of companies. And for transparency, we met each other back in the day at Flexport. So I was most recently before Writer, I was the head of product in the company called A Team. Prior to that, I was leading the card and spend team at Brex, marketplace at Flexport, where we met, Stripe and Square. So good amount of time both in fintech and marketplaces, all doing various types of product work. Most recently now at Writer, I've been here for about 6 months now and I'm leading the developer product. And by that, think about Writer has its two sides of the same coin. There's the SaaS offering, and then
Mhm.
separately, as the business evolves, we've grown to provide services to larger and larger companies. They want access to the core primitives, and they want to have the flexibility to build on top of our models and our tooling. So
Mhm.
we provide them this thing called AI Studio, which allows them to build either we have let's call three pillars: the no-code applications on one side, and on the other extreme, we have developer APIs. And between them, we have the Writer framework, which is a no-code on the front end, full Python on the back end. So think about it like drag and drop components, but you can fully customize them.
Mhm.
And unlike other application development framework, Writer framework is open source and it's built with AI as a first principle rather than just bolted on top. Guys are the AI and naturally our models that you can use others if you want are fully integrated as a first principle in the application rather than an afterthought.
Got it. Wow, that's actually you guys do a lot more than I knew. So I feel like last when I heard about Writer, it was really blowing up. It was like during this trend of content generation, writing applications, and everybody was talking about the killer app for AI. It feels like I think there's been a little bit of a culling of those businesses. There's maybe fewer, and AI Writer.ai is one of the ones that has stood the test of time thus far. And it's interesting that you guys are moving into more of a helping enterprises manage their own AI language models. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I think Writer story is essentially the transformer story. So Writer in its
Hmm.
previous iterations, led by May and was seeing the two co-founders, it started actually, and it was called Cordova, started as a translation software or translation tool. And they use transformers for that. And they very quickly noticed that they can do so much more than just translation and evolve the product and started training our own language models. And this is before GPT-3 came out and or GPT 3.5 and blew up. So first and foremost, unlike a lot of the other players, we have our own models that we train um, and we use, and
Mm.
and our customers use also. That's the first piece. The second piece, unlike other maybe companies that train models, and when I say train models, I don't mean fine tune, train models from scratch.
Right.
Unlike other shops that train models, or even fine tune, we started first and foremost from day one to sell to enterprise. So if you look at other
Mm,
companies, and like there's amazing companies out there, if you look at other foundational model companies, a lot of them started as a research institution, went into consumer, it blew up, right, for these great products. And now some of them are dabbling with the idea of more into enterprise. But as to sell into enterprise takes more than just your core product. It's about the offering that comes around it. So it ranges from data retention, compliance, legal, security, redundancy, deployment, and there's so much more that comes into it. Now, this is not to say that this is not like necessarily rocket science, but like these things take time. If you don't start with them from day one, it's just like it requires a lot of investment to get there. And I'll give you
hmm
one small example, and it also relates to why we have our own models. When you come and sell into a large enterprise, and they ask you, "So how do you train your model?" If you're a rapper, it's actually a very hard answer. You can't give that. You have no idea what goes there. Now, the reason they ask you those questions is because they're all very terrified of will they get sued for copyright material. And that's where it starts becoming a real issue. And that was actually one of the drivers, among other reasons, that drove us to train our own models and build that full stack from scratch. Now, as the story of Writer evolved, yes, we started into that quote unquote marketing content generation.
hmm
But what became very clear is that A, these tools can do much more than marketing, and B, there's appetites.
Yeah.
And C, as you come into an enterprise, you already go through legal compliance, InfoSec to be able to go through. And then naturally, the person who makes a lot of times the decision is the CIO type. So as our business
hmm
evolved and as our use cases expanded, we sit into a room with a technical persona and they just have, I would say, it's not a different. Again, this is why I said it's two sides of the same coin. They don't necessarily, they're excited by the SaaS offering, but they also want
Yeah.
access to build. And I think in these organizations, there's like this interesting balance between we are here to help you as well as we are here to supply you with the tools and the frameworks and the solution that you can accelerate your own building and development in your organizations.
Interesting. So you guys are allowing developers in these organizations to effectively take your models that you've trained, maybe add in some fine tuning with their whatever data that they have, and then use it as part of their product. Like they can then
Absolutely.
decide how they want to use it.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's fascinating because it feels like there's two sides. You mentioned the SaaS product as well as the developer product, right? The SaaS product really is here's a common use case that demonstrates the power of this.
Mhm.
You guys want to buy it for the SaaS product. That's something that's useful today, but that's almost just like your wedge into the
Mhm.
organization. It's like it has enough product demand internally that they want to use that as a standalone product, and then the developers see it, and you already went through all the hoops that needed
Yeah,
to happen for you to sell it.
absolutely. And if you think about how we got here, is we had the core offering, people bought it, and then they're like, I actually needed to do similar but slightly different. So then we
Mhm,
started building the tooling internally so we can tweak and help you build what we would call custom applications. So we would
mhm,
work with a customer to build those custom applications with them or for them. And then as we built this tooling internally, it became very clear that this same tooling with better UI, better UX, and so on can be exposed to the developer persona and the CIO
yeah,
type or IT or CTO and so on. And by the way, it's actually we have a lot of non-technical people building on our tools as well. And so I would
mhm,
say the persona is ranging from like a non-technical savvy user all the way to a quote unquote AI engineer or data scientists or data engineers and so on. So and it really
yeah,
depends on the use cases. So there's things they can do with no code and deploy it like this. there's things that require, more API integrations. The other thing is all over those three pillars talk with each other. So what do I
Mhm.
mean by that? One of the things that we found to be very important as you go into these companies is to bridge the gap between the technical domain and the business domain. So specifically, in our case, what this it means in practice is, let's say a VP of marketing or a marketing persona can build a no-code app, can write the prompting, and then separately, the engineering org can take this application and interact with it directly through the API layer and
Mm.
pass in the inputs that they need, whether it's data, and consume the outputs that the model generates. So if you think about it from an engineering point of view, this encapsulated AI application is essentially like a microservice that sits in some cases on us, some cases elsewhere, depending on the deployment, and they're hitting it. But what this does, it separates the API layer and the business logic. So the business user can still change and control the prompts without needing a
Yeah.
full deployment cycle every time. Now, this is important as the business evolves, as the models changes, as the needs change. You don't necessarily want to have the need to go through the deployment pipeline every time. And this is something that was like, I would say it's a core tenet of Writer as a whole. For example, we have what we call guardrails. We allow you to configure your brand tone, your brand voice, the various guardrails that you want to do. And that does not require engineering. Where if you look at, let's say, platform like Vertex or Azure Cloud or all of those other hyperscaler platforms, a lot of time the way the UI is built is very technical. B, I don't know when was the last time you met a DevOps person that would let a marketer to go in their cloud infra to configure their guardrails.
Yeah.
There's almost like a misalignment of the persona in
Mhm.
those cases because I don't want, like, me myself, if someone tells me go configure something in the cloud infra, I don't want to touch that. I'm afraid that I'll take something down. So
Yeah.
there's don't put me inside your AWS cluster. I don't want anything to do with this. So I think that's like where we took a step back and really thought about it from the ground up. What does it mean to be a full stack API solution? AI
Yeah.
solutions are.
There's so many corollaries to, like, kinda like what we've experienced here at Anvil as well. It's oftentimes when somebody is trying to build an online experience for a set of documents, the engineer actually does not care and does not want to care about how these documents need to be filled out, why they're filled out this way. They just want to build the integration. And so we give our like operations people that understand the documents the ability to build these workflows, and the engineers can really focus on integrating it and embedding it into their products. Definitely see a lot of corollaries there. Would like to definitely maybe reorient the conversation a little bit towards a time that you personally, we could talk all day about selling build versus buy tools because that's what the world we live in. But what about you personally making a decision like this? As a product manager, you're probably making a lot of these decisions on a regular basis. But was there a particular time that you felt was maybe an interesting decision process or really taught you something about whether you should buy or build something?
Yeah, so I think there's an inherent problem in tech when it comes to build versus buy. And I actually
Mhm.
see a correlation between the decision to build versus buy with seniority in the org.
Mhm.
Meaning, and that's like a function of how we incentivize the EPD organization as a whole a lot of time.
Mhm.
So the more senior you are, the more likely you will be to be open and even willing to go with the buy because you're not
Mhm.
like you're incentivized for outcomes rather than if you
Yeah.
like let's say a more junior PM, there's like this impression that you're held accountable for building something. And if you're not building and
Mhm.
I'm just like a procurement buyer of services, like what is my value in the organization? So there's almost like this inherent misalignment, like weird misalignment within the incentives within organizations.
Hmm.
Meaning, so if you're asking me in my career, I like climbed the barricades and against the buy when I was early on because knowingly or unknowingly the incentives were
Yeah.
skewed. Where now I'm like, yeah, I just need to get something quickly to market. Like we can start with buy, and if the need come and we can then build in parallel or whatever. So I definitely see that. Specifically, I think there's a bunch of interesting cases that I can think of. Some of them I was not necessarily involved, but
Yeah.
was like, sorry, not the decision might have happened prior, but one really interesting one that is also relates to my looking back at it to my current role is actually when we were at Flexport. So when we were
Yeah.
at Flexport, part of the big challenge in Flexport is the just like unstructured data that they receive and needing
Hmm.
to structure that data in a way that their models can run on it. And I think you are very familiar with this problem, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think some of the decisions we've made around build felt because it was a combination of the offerings in the market, mainly OCR, were not good enough, but
Yeah.
also we thought we'd know better. And by the way, at that
Hmm.
time, we may or may not have been right, but as you look at this new technology, specifically everything that's happening with vision models and LLMs, it, I would be surprised if like 95 to 99% of what we built at Flexport was not thrown into the trash can. And it's crazy if
Yeah.
you think about it. Like we invested 2 years building this whole data pipeline that consumes invoices a lot of times or
Yeah.
CSVs, parses them, has this exception model that an agent can come in and extract the information and tag it and this and that. And now you can throw most of this code out, bring in like a foundational model or any one of those tools, and just like,
Hmm.
great, that is extracted mostly. And they still probably need a human in the loop. But, and I think that's a really humbling lesson. Now,
Do you,
hey, good.
I was like, do you think that just even the sheer amount of time it took to build that data pipeline played into the fact that you have throughout you think the code's probably thrown out now? If you were able to build what you built in those 2 years in 2 months and have it be in production and used for the remaining 22 months before throwing it out, would that have skewed your build versus
Uh,
buy
uh,
decision?
Looking back at it now, absolutely. I think none of us knew. And this is also
Mhm.
part of the problem. When we went on this adventure, none of us knew that this is what it's going to take.
Mm.
We looked at a bunch of vendors, and I think this is like the classic problem with enterprise vendors. They promise you something, but the only way you can see it is if you integrate. And a lot of
Right.
times the results, they're not that they're bad, they're just not don't always meet what was promised. And so I think that's in a lot of ways that's what creates I won't say resistance, but hesitancy when it comes to the build versus buy. But knowing what I know now, like how long it took and probably after I left to maintain this and continue working on this, yeah, there was like the feeling at the time when we looked at the possible vendors is that there was not a good solution out there in the market. Now it could be that we didn't find the right
Yeah.
solution. For context, Flexport at the time at least received more invoices than Facebook and Google globally combined.
Mhm.
So the sheer
Yeah.
volume of input, like I'm not even talking about CSV, I'm talking about invoices, the pure invoices. And the
Yeah.
context here is because you get paid for multiple vendors per ship, billed for multiple vendors per shipment per client. So it just like explodes. And then you need to consume all of that, parse it, and this all feeds into the pricing model for the next shipment and the next shipment. And so it was just like this, like we looked at this and we were like, if Facebook and Google are not doing this, there's no shortage of both engineers and they're doing this manually. Like
Yeah.
there's not a good solution out there in the market to do this.
Do you maybe this is a crude comparison here, but it feels like sometimes when you're making the decision to build versus buy, and as you're more senior, you're more open to looking outwards to find solutions and really surveying the landscape before you know how to aggregate the data you need to make a proper decision. Whereas we're more junior, maybe there's a little bit more navel gazing. You're more focused on like how do I solve the problem, and you're looking inward as opposed to really being open to survey the landscape or even knowing what kind of questions you need to be asking while you're surveying the landscape to decide. whether you should actually build this item versus buy it.
No, for sure. And
Is
I
that like a
think a part of it is the more experience you get, the more you can pattern match and say, okay, maybe this is not the exact what we need, but by using X plus Y and 2 months of coding, I just saved 24 months of work. I think. Or it's not
Yeah,
the
yeah.
like you're also more willing to make compromises probably. 'Cause you're like, okay, this is the ideal state, but you understand that there's like how far away from the ideal state this brings me. If you're
Mhm,
looking at that delta, you're like, okay, this is far, this is good enough. That delta is small enough that I'm willing to.
mhm,
Yeah, it's not ideal, but it's getting me a lot like further along enough. And it's not just navel gazing. I also feel like there's an element of, I'm trying to think how to say this, on the job training, let's call it, on almost like where, especially with more novel technologies, I think there's an element of it is when you're senior, you don't care, you just need the output or the outcomes. But the more junior you are, there's almost like an element of you're training on the company's dime or this new novel approach or this new technology. And it's not necessarily, it's
mhm.
not intentional to be clear. No one is like malicious, far from it. But again, I think there's like this element of because you're not accountable for the same things, it's like the incentives are a little broken there. If you think of most
Mm,
organizations, how they incentivize it, or how they measure quality of engineers or PMs or even designers, it's by throughput, right? And
yeah.
to some
It's
extent,
by what you built.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
what you built,
like lines
not
of
by what you
code,
integrated.
exactly, lines of
Yeah.
code, or to some extent later on as companies mature, it's like GMV or various KPIs. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of time there's not much incentive to. I see like, and again, maybe I've just been at broken organizations, but it's I could have bought a vendor and reach and hit the KPI, or I could have built it myself and reached the KPI. In a lot of orgs, the second build it and reach the KPI is held in a higher esteem than bought a vendor and reach the KPI. And the
Yeah.
PM or the engineer or designers are so given that the incentives are like, oh, if I want to get promoted, if I want to get like higher comp, more equity, whatever, it's about what I build, not what I solved. And that's a real problem.
I mean, that's a very Silicon Valley way of thinking about it,
Mhm.
right? It's like very, we're builders here. Like we build things here. And so, and it almost to the detriment, it's to the detriment of the idea that like the goal is not to build something. The goal is to live another day so you can fight the next battle. And in a lot of ways, especially at a startup, right? Like a more established company, maybe less an issue, but, and it's how far can you push with the resources that you have? And sometimes buying a vendor, and in this case, it sounds not, I mean, we not buying a vendor, the OCR system, it can, buying the vendor could actually be a better outcome than actually building
Yeah,
it
but I'll give
internally.
you another example, which I wasn't involved in the decision, but I think it taught me a lot. Earlier days, had a relationship with Marqeta,
Hmm.
the credit card issuing company. And Brex always knew it's in their DNA, they're builders. They always knew they're going to build direct integration into the card network with MasterCard, blah, 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 blah. But that takes a very long time. So you have a
Yeah.
decision. You either don't have a product for a couple of years and build this and you don't have certainty, or you wrap a vendor, ship quickly, build a multi-billion-dollar business while in parallel you swap out the backend. A way
Hmm.
that's not, in this case, it does impact, but minimally impacts the customer. Now, by the way, there's a bunch of other players that followed that playbook and did not build the integration. Like Wrap is one example, and that's okay. Now, that gave X years down the line, that gave Brex certain advantages in certain periods of time versus Ramp certain advantages in certain periods of time. I think long term, if you're asking me who is in a better position from a technology point of view to solve customer problems and innovate, I 100% think
Hmm.
it's Brex that moved away from using the third party vendor and brought a business critical component in house.
Yeah.
But none of them could have made it to market if they started from the build versus the buy. And I think this is the other thing. I think you really, as you think about build versus buy, it's where does that sit in your business stack? Is this
Hmm.
like a pure business critical thing that you cannot afford handing it to a third party that will, if they go down, you have no control. And I think that's the other component that you need to really think about there,
Yeah.
as you
It,
think about it.
it's interesting because what I heard you just say there, and just summarizing, it's yes, the card processing, the card issuing is business critical. And that's why Brex eventually decided to build it. But in the early days, before Brex had a business model, before Brex
Yep.
had customers, you needed to prove that this business deserved to exist.
Uh,
And so the fastest way to prove that was to wrap an existing card issuer. And once you have proven that, then you are given the opportunity to
You
actually
can make the
solve the other
decision
downstream
exactly.
problem.
And you can make the
Mm.
decision at that
Yeah,
point. Do I want to focus on infra? Or do I want to do something else? And that's, by the
yeah,
way, at that junction, at least as of a couple of years ago, Brex chose infra and
yeah.
Ramp chose something else. And that's okay. There's no right or wrong. Only time will tell. By the way, the
Hmm.
market is big enough for all of these players. But I think that's like a question of a company DNA as well. But like
Yeah,
to even get to that junction, you had to you had to validate that there's a business and focus on like building customer value. And no offense, building infra is not customer value. No, it's not.
yeah,
Like it's just not
yeah,
because that's not the
totally.
core business. Like if I come to you and use your credit card, I don't care which rails you're using. I need it to work. I need it
Hmm.
to, in this case, the spend management tools and all that. If you focus on infra from day one, you're not going to get to that ever. So I think that
Yeah.
like the other thing to remember, what is in your core wheelhouse for your business versus not. And I think in the AI space, you actually see some interesting things that are happening there, which is like models versus not, like model evaluations
Yeah.
versus not. So I think there's a bunch of vendors that are providing real value and you
Hmm.
can make a decision. You can build a lot of this in-house or you can use a vendor that helps you focus on what you need to focus. Let's say build the
Yeah.
best models. And I don't want to deal with building an evaluation platform in-house or like like I don't know, cloud cluster management or whatever. And I think
Yeah.
another great example of a company like that is, and they're getting criticized for their cost maybe, but Datadog. Yeah, I can build
Hmm.
Datadog myself or use open source tooling to do this, but I'm using my engineers to do something that is not in my core competency as a company. It's a tool I
Right.
need, but if I'm trying to sell, I don't know, a SaaS offering, why would I build an observability platform?
Yeah. Exactly. No, I feel like it's funny because I've actually interviewed multiple people on this show already where they've built their own models or they have their own models internally. And I think we're at that point in time where we're so early. People have been talking about AI for let's call it the last 24 months, but we're still early enough in this transition that like there's going to be quite a handful of companies that decide that they need to own their models. They got to train it themselves and build it. And there's going to be a whole nother set of companies that are going to be just leveraging publicly available LLMs. Anvil is one of them that's leveraging publicly available LLMs because we're more focused on applying those LLMs to our workflow as opposed to we don't need that much fine tuning for it to work well for us. So there's going to be a bifurcation, I think, where there's the like pure application of AI companies that are going to be rolling out, and they typically are probably trying to solve a existing workflow problem that they have that their software probably already does. And then there's going to be the ones where Dialpad is an example. I interviewed the chief product officer, former coworker of mine, and where they actually believe that owning the model for their kind of like voice transcription service is really important because it gives them that advantage in terms of
Mhm.
just live transcription, like in the dial pad kind of interface. And yeah,
I think
time
the
will
other
see
thing
which
is
one's
it
right.
allows these companies to say that they're an AI company. That's the other thing.
Yeah, true AI company. Yeah.
But this is actually an interesting point. For example, we today don't let you fine tune our models.
Mm,
And
okay.
there's a reason. We don't think fine tuning. So I'm going to be facetious for a second. We think fine tuning doesn't work. Now I'm going to take it back. I
Okay.
think for most users, when they say they want to fine tune, they actually don't understand what they're committing themselves into. Meaning,
Hmm.
to fine tune a model, the investment. on data cleanliness, data structure, getting it right, the cost of doing that and doing that well is extremely high. Where
Mhm.
our belief and the results show it is that a good LLM, whether it's a verticalized LLM, like specialized vertical, like we have like a Fin or Med, or a general LLM, which we also have and others have as well, with RAG, gets you in a lot of the cases, close to, if not better results than a fine-tuned model, or a company
Mhm.
that doesn't have the skills and the investment to back the fine-tuning. So, like
Mm.
when we talk to some of the largest companies in the world and they ask us, can we fine tune a model? We tell them no. And this is why we're happy for you to run us head to head, RAG plus our model versus a fine tune model. And that
Yeah.
we don't think that you will get that much lift, if at all, from the fine tune model. But the
Interesting.
cost of fine tuning a model is insanely high, and people are not registering that when they go down this path.
Can we kinda, like, set the stage a little bit or put in context the cost of fine-tuning versus, let's just say, training a foundational model, right? What's the, like, order of magnitude there between the cost of training a foundational model and fine-tuning?
When I say that, I want to be clear when I'm talking about
Yeah.
it. I'm not saying there are cases where a company needs to train their foundational model, and there are cases they need to
Mhm.
fine tune. What I'm saying is, when you come to an average company, it could be a global 2000, global 4000, it doesn't matter. And they come to you and they say, we want to fine tune a model, and you actually scratch the surface. They make that statement without understanding because their data itself is not structured in a way that they can fine tune a model today. It's just not.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a heavy investment by the organization to get that data in a format that any model,
Mhm.
whether it's Writer, OpenAI, Anthropic, any one of these companies can actually do something with it. Man, there's
Mhm.
a whole company that's worth $12 billion, and that's all they do, scale. They take data
Yeah.
and make it useful for fine tuning. Like, there's a reason why scale is worth $12 billion or whatever it is today, and good for them. But it's not an easy thing to do, and
Yeah.
especially for an organization that doesn't have the skills and the talent to do so. You're taking on yourself this overhead that is completely unnecessary if you take an off the shelf model, again,
Yeah.
whether it's a vertical model or a general model, and add RAG into it that gives it access to your specific organization information, and you will get to like close to, if not to some in some
Yeah.
instances, better results. And the better results is not because fine tuning is doesn't work. It's because the quality of when you pipe bad data in through fine tuning, you're affecting the model.
Yeah.
So if you don't know what you're doing to begin with, now as we're talking about the cost of training a model, the devil's in the details here. To be
Mhm.
clear, if you hear Anthropic talking, they're talking about like 10 billion, 100 billion, 500 billion. Uh, the issue here is what's your approach to and your beliefs on these models. And what do I mean by that? Is some of these companies have a belief that there's going to be one model to rule them all. And that's okay. And in that
Yeah.
case, yeah, you need like a very large model that knows everything, does everything, and computes and is really quick and so on and so forth. And to train those models, you throw a hell of a ton of H100, H200s, whatever NVIDIA chip, and NVIDIA is happy because their stock goes up and yay. But on the other hand, there's a class of companies that are not going in that approach. And their view is that, like humans, you will have specialized models that are very good at domain specific work. And then you'll have an
Yeah.
orchestration layer as you bring in a question and they route this to the relevant model. Like the same way that I won't go to my accountant if I need health advice.
Yeah.
It seems like a little unreasonable to go to like this godlike model when I need someone to interpret my X-rays or give me like or even customer support. Like it's just different skill sets.
But wouldn't
Uh,
it be better if you could just talk to God? Yeah.
Maybe, but
Maybe.
but the point is that
I
the cost of training these models, these domain specific models,
yeah.
is significantly it's much cheaper. And
Yeah.
on top of that, I think at least for not the non-frontier model, let's call it, companies that are trading models, especially if you're in the enterprise world. In reality, we're all 3 to 6 months behind or ahead of each other. And then
Mhm.
the question here is, and depending on the space, I'll give you an example. Ryder was the first company to bring to production graph-based RAG. Um,
Mhm.
I can talk for hours why it's better than vector database. It's not really relevant for this conversation, but now you see the whole market, whether it's through Neo4j or others, are also aligning themselves into like understanding the knowledge graphs and using the graph-based approach has better results. It scales better. It's faster than like the classic vector-based solution, less hallucinations and so on. But on the other hand, like there's areas that the other companies are ahead of us, and that's okay. But we're all more or less know what we're working on at any
Yeah.
given point in time. My what I'm trying to say is, it's where you allocate your GPUs, and you can use also when you're in an arms race, like some of these companies are, they are throwing money at GPUs to brute force problems rather than using more novel techniques when it comes to
Mhm.
training, to synthetic technique generation, and so on. So the statement of the 100 billion cost, I don't buy it. I think it's like a view of where AI is going, plus a brute force approach to solving a problem where there's more novel techniques out there that could give you very similar results. At the end of the day, if you look at the top ranked model on Hell, that's the Stanford benchmark or others, the variance in the scores is not that high, but the
Mhm.
variance in
Mhm.
the cost could be very high.
Yeah. So, I mean, because time back real quick to like build versus buy, because I know you mentioned something earlier about fine tuning in RAG, right? Like it's like we had this framework that we discussed early in this conversation around what is it that you can do, like buying a vendor, for example, to get you as close to the outcome that you're trying to get to without as fast as possible. And it
Yeah.
sounds like in this, it's a similar decision making
Hmm.
framework for whether to fine tune or use RAG for your models, because it sounds like RAG can get you 99% of the way there at a significantly lower cost than fine
And
tuning
faster and significantly
and
faster.
faster. And so, in a lot of ways, the framework applies
Hmm.
beyond just building versus buying. It's like actually just what product decision do you want to make?
Yeah.
Like, what's the direction you want to go? And would it be accurate to say, actually, for laymen, that in some ways the challenge of manipulating your data, in one way is to think about it is I need to modify the data I own that's already messy to fit into the model that the LLM was consume it. And that's expensive because that takes skills, that takes humans, that takes effort. And the other way is saying, hey, how can we backwards translate? I have my model and the LLM already has a way to reference your model. So there's less work for me as
Hmm.
a consumer of this LLM to prepare my data. So it's like, do you want to put in the effort to make your data fit this new world, or do you want the new world to just know how to read your current old world data?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. There's this funny story. I don't know if it's true, by the way, but there's this funny story about
Yeah.
SAP and Apple. This was when Steve Jobs was still alive. And apparently, Apple tried to migrate from whatever ERP they were using to use SAP. And they failed
Hmm.
6 times or some 5 or 6 times. It failed. Multiple, look, all of these times.
They tried that many times.
And then at some point, they
Yeah.
came to Steve Jobs, okay, we're trying again. And they show him his staff and why it would be successful this time. And I'm assuming there's a bunch of consultants that were involved in this also. And then he stops them halfway through and he's, guys, maybe we should take a different approach. And they're like, okay, maybe instead of modifying SAP to fit the Apple business, we change the Apple business to fit SAP. Meaning, SAP is such a customizable beast, but every time we try to
Hmm.
customize it to Apple, this didn't work. Maybe we need to change the way
Hmm.
Apple works to stop being such a snowflake from like a ERP point of view to fit into this system of record. And again, don't know if the story is true, but I think it's true in this. It fits into this context, which is you can spend all this time and effort to massage this data to fit to the way the model works, or you can throw it inside a vector database or some data store. It doesn't matter if it's like a graph one or a vector one, whatever. and just have the model consume it in the way it knows. Now, there is work that needs to happen to get it into those
Yeah.
stores, but the work is significantly lower. Now, again, we can talk about there's techniques, there's better and worse solutions there, but like obviously I'm talking about RAG as an umbrella term here. But I think a lot of times people go on this adventure to fine tune or train their own model, and they're not necessarily always aware
Yeah.
what that means.
Maybe it's a naming issue. We shouldn't call it fine tuning a model. It should be like, I don't know, engine replacement of a model. I don't know. Just make it something
Yeah,
that sounds
y-
more
yeah,
complicated.
because it's not, oh, I'm just tweaking it. No, you're not. You're like
Yeah.
literally, you're taking all of your data and like if you go into any one of these companies, whether it's the OpenAI fine tuning dogs, or I think now Anthropic also allows it. Like the structure, like the data needs to come in a specific structure. So someone needs to take this data and literally
Hmm.
map it in a way that fits it. And it's non-trivial amount of work.
Yeah.
You need to map it into specific roles. What is the content, like the question answer, the ideal generated text. Again, there is a reason why scale is worth $12 billion, because many people need this data and it's expensive and it's hard to do it. I think to your point, if we talk about the Flexport story, if
Hmm.
I knew it's going to take us whatever 2 years to do this or whatever, however long it took, would I have done this? I'm not sure if the answer would be yes.
Yeah.
We might have ended up doing it anyway, but we probably would have looked at creative solutions more. Maybe the right
Just to bring it
solution
full.
is to go to Manila, hire 10,000 people and put better guardrails. I don't know, but belly, which Flexport to some extent did back in those days, but maybe
Right.
expanding that operation would have ended up being cheaper than putting X engineers for Y months. Yeah, probably.
Just to tie it all up again, if only you had a godlike AI that you could talk to and tell you the future,
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
would have solved the problem. Real, this has been a fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed it so far, Matan. I do want to wrap this up a little bit. We always have two wrap up questions at the end, and the first one is, share a little bit, share something that you've been working on, both personally or professionally, that you're really excited about and you're looking forward to spending more time on.
Both professionally and personally. So personally,
Either or, it
okay,
doesn't have to be both.
we can do one of each. So on a personal level, I have my firstborn daughter who's 6 months now. So that's like a personal level. That's like a definitely a project. When she was born, Ryder sent me this really funny onesie, which is like little language model. Uh,
So yeah, that's
uh,
still language model in training.
exactly,
Um,
exactly. So that's definitely, and we all have our own personal traumas. So you're like, how do I minimize the traumas to her? And you figure that every day you figure that you have very little control. Life is
yeah.
life. On a professional level, I think I was talking to someone about this today. Actually, I've been to a bunch of fast growing companies. I think what is unique in this current experience, it's not just the pace of growth of Ryder, the company, which I've been at fast growing companies before. It's that you're building a company while the whole industry is shifting on a daily basis almost. And that just keeps you definitely, the anxiety levels are high and on your toes. Every day there's a new model, every day there's a new technique, every day. So I think there's a lot to be done there, and to ingest and consume, and also to think about talking about our topic. What can you bring? What do you need to build in house? What do you take from the open source community? What do you
Yeah.
buy versus build yourself? What do you insource versus outsource? So I think there's a lot of these like constant trade-offs that are happening. And on a personal, like on a professional level, like what I'm excited by, yeah, I'm excited to get back to working with developers and building tools that make
Hmm.
AI accessible in scale for some of the most largest companies in the world. I think there's this thing that if you look at some of the companies out there, us included to some extent today, there's an assumption around the knowledge that the individual comes when they're building against your product. And I
Hmm.
think to your point earlier, we're very Silicon Valley centric. Most of the world that's building against these tools is not based in the Bay Area. And especially as you start thinking about enterprises, but the opportunity to really drive change is immense in these companies. So how do you, on one side, simplify the product and explain it, but on the other, don't sacrifice, because the problem is simplicity. You're allowed to, and this is usually the problem with all of these frameworks out there. By abstracting complexity, you're also reducing usefulness over time. So how do you handle that trade-off? And I'm really excited by that, those internal conversations and where the industry and market is going there.
Nice. Yeah, that's another difficult question. We should start another podcast for that one. Just call it trade-offs. We'll just
Yeah,
call it, have a podcast called
yeah.
trade-offs. Awesome. And then the last question here is share one product that you've purchased recently that you either love or you would never buy again. Most people, actually everyone has chosen something that they love. But yeah, I'll put that out there and see what you choose.
Yes, on a professional or personal level.
Any level. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's this company we use at Writer, and I think this talks, and like our logos on their website, so it's clear that we're a customer. And their name is Base
Hmm.
10, and they work with model deployment and stuff like that. So I've known the founders from Base for many years. We actually worked together at Gumroad, and I got introduced, funny enough, to Writer through them. And as I joined Writer, I became unplanned, like the product counterpoint for them on Writer. And I
Mm.
think what they're doing and the work they're putting in with their clients is actually tremendous. If you're in the AI space or deploying machine learning models, you should look into them. But yeah, I think they have been instrumental to some of our success in scaling the business and getting our models quickly and fast in
What
production.
what sets them apart? What is it that makes them so instrumental?
Yeah, so it's hard for me to say because I'm not comparing them to their peers. I'm comparing them to other vendors I've worked with. I just think the
Yeah.
level of care from the whole team. And hey, this is
Mhm.
not an easy problem when you're dealing with models that are getting high QPS across multiple clusters and so on and so forth. And the industry is moving really fast, and there's various techniques on how to get these models to run faster and not, and so on. And specifically on the writer side, unlike other players in the market, we don't distill our models. And
Mhm.
that's an intentional decision because as you embed our models into your critical workflows, you cannot afford for the model to quote unquote become dumber over time. It's just not an option in the enterprise world. If you say you don't distill your model, you don't quantize your model, and you take that off the table, you basically just took like two very large tools that are used by the industry to reduce costs and also to accelerate speed. So then you need a partner to, as you work with them, that is very mindful of and really helps you think through these scenarios and how to scale and how to scale in a way that's financially responsible.
Yeah.
And they are that partner.
Awesome. Everybody, that was Base 10, right? That was the company? Base
Yeah.
10? Awesome. Thank you, Matan. It's been a real pleasure catching up, sharing stories, and really diving deep on AI this time. I feel like this is the first interview we've done where we've dove so deep on AI. I should have known AI is in the name of the company. But yeah, thank you for coming on the show. Really enjoyed the conversation and hope to have you back at some point down the future.
Would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. If you found this show valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or here on YouTube. We'd love if you could leave us a rating and or a review, as that helps others find this podcast. See you next time.